As an avid comic reader and a Soulsborne fan, I was surprised to find out that there are comics based off of the industry-defining games. Given that the average person's understanding of the lore looks like this, I know some people out there do read every item description and piece together the story themselves, but let's be honest here. Most people who have played any of these games just breeze through and either stop playing out of frustration or push through and experience some of the best fights and challenges the medium of video games has to offer without knowing a lick of the story.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna kill this boss, obviously. I'm gonna call it a day, guys. Obviously hasn't worked, and yeah, I'm just gonna call it a day. I guess I'll try and do this boss again, but like, if I can't kill him again, I'm probably just gonna quit.
To be fair, the lore of Dark Souls is extensive, dense, and shrouded in mystery, so expanded material could work. I'm just not sure as to if the draw of a comic book based on a game can live up to the actual game. I mean, after defeating a boss for the first time in any of these games, it usually has me on the edge of my seat, heart beating fast, locked the fuck in, and dopamine just blasting. So how could a comic keep me engaged like that, with a property that is basically just another medieval Dungeons and Dragons type of world? Well, let's find out in this video. So, according to the Dark Souls wiki, there are currently 6 Western comics as of 2025. The last release being an omnibus, a collection of the first 3 story arcs in a giant book. That came out in December of 2018, over 7 years ago. So I think it's safe to say that the comics are dead, especially since the Dark Souls trilogy was laid to rest with the final DLC release, The Ring City, for Dark Souls 3 in 2017. So the comics kicked on for about a year after the games concluded, and now the world's moved on to Elden Ring. But in 2024, a manga was released. There's 2 volumes of it currently out, and it's still ongoing to my knowledge. So I'll also be talking about that briefly at the end. Let's take a gander at each of them, shall we? Warning, spoilers ahead, so if by some reason you have the urge to read any of these, then pause this, go read them. They're quite short, and then get back to me. I love you. Dark Souls 2, Into the Light. A one-shot that was released before the video game, written by Rob Williams and Andy Ewington, with art by Simon Colby. It's a beautifully drawn comic that tells the story of every new Dark Souls player going straight into danger without listening and immediately dying. The comic is a short, centered around a character we can only assume is supposed to be the player, as they're in the full Faram armor set. That is what the character on the cover of the game is decked out in. This, along with them referring to themselves as someone who came to this place, the Kingdom of Drangleic, in hopes of finding a cure for the curse. If you're unfamiliar with the Curse of the Undead from Dark Souls, basically humanity was branded with the Dark Sign, which allows for them to not die upon death. You just come back to life as an undead. But the more you die and you lose hope and sense of purpose, you begin to hollow. A fate worse than death. Hollows wander, attacking passers-by until they eventually don't move anymore, having lost their minds and purpose in life long, long ago, left to just sit and wait until the rest of the world ends. So yeah, this Chad is supposed to be us. He approaches a bonfire and meets this nice guy called Salden. Salden gives the guy some good advice, and since the other guy is us, we completely ignore that advice because what the fuck could he possibly know? Well, he knew to take a light since it was dark as shit. Our guy then corrects his error, grabbing a light, but then is nearly killed a couple of times. Once by one of those huge turtle guys from Dark Souls 2. A dragon makes an appearance, and then our boy is invaded by another player. Our dumb shit does make it out, but he seems to be bleeding out. Luckily, he makes it back to Salden. Instead of resting at the bonfire, he writes down a summon sign? The in-game way for co-op to work. You write down a sign and another player in another world accepts and you join, or you can just leave a funny message like, try finger butthole. So yeah, the character disappears, only to then reappear standing gloriously by the bonfire again, ready to head back out and die again. So for the first comic based on the Dark Souls franchise, it's absolutely not bad at all. I like how it's in black and white. I do wish that it was a bit more clear about what was happening, but in true Dark Souls spirit, nothing makes sense and absolutely nothing will be explained to you. I rate this a Souls out of Dark Souls. Moving on, Dark Souls, The Breath of Andolus, written by George Mann, with art by Alan Kwa. Yes, definitely Kwa. Coloring done by Komikaki Studios. This is the first Dark Souls comic that is a completely original story, not accompanying a game. The creative team still want to give you the true Dark Souls experience though, so the first page is a huge context dump through text. as they couldn't fit it into one of their legendary opening cinematics. The story takes place in the land of Ishra, that was lit up during the Age of Fire by the breath of a dragon named Andolus. The undead curse happened, of course, and this guy named Baron Karamas knew that, quote, "Through a worm king's dying breath, life itself would usher forth." So this guy killed Andolus, and without the dragon's breath, the land was doomed to die, because the dragon is gone and his breath is too. This is all funky already, because I don't think it really fits into Dark Souls' established lore. The Age of Fire started with the Lord of Sunlight. Gwyn defeated the ancient dragons who ruled the world, which allowed the world to flourish and freeing it from perpetual fog and smoke before. The world was then replaced with sunlight. However, fire can't last forever. Gwyn decided to sacrifice himself to prolong the Age of Fire by burning himself to accomplish this. It in turn then brought the curse of the undead on humankind, blah blah blah. If you know, you know. So Andolus's breath is redundant if it's in the Age of Fire, since the world is already lit up. I suppose with the phrasing, brightest days of the Age of Fire, I guess it means that the world was lit up already, but the dragon made it even brighter. Baron Karamas made a mistake, all in all, so he fled, and the story takes place in what is apparently the dying days of the Age of Fire. The story itself centers around this warrior named Fira and her companion, a scryer. Think of him kinda like a magical person. His name is Aldrich. No relation at all to Aldrich from Dark Souls 3. So she's plagued with visions of her family and her home burning, and as they travel, she becomes undead in hopes of finishing her quest. I like how the author said in this interview that he wanted to start off with something that was just grotesque and shocking. It didn't work for me. Okay, but what's Fira's goal? Well, they're on a quest to revive Andolus and restore the world, or some shit, whatever the fucking dragon did before. They can do this by retrieving 3 artifacts, pieces of Andolus's body that have been fashioned into weaponry and armor. Along the journey, we get shameless nods towards the games we love, such as name-dropping Ornstein and his spear, or the worst thing ever. Solaire of Astora, the Sunbro himself, shows up in issue 1. To no effect or reason whatsoever. It doesn't affect anything. Fira is trapped in an illusion in a crystal cave, and then Solaire shows up, not named, but he's the only one with that design on his signature iron armor. He drew that sun pattern himself. The wiki states that it's, quote, a man wearing the iron set. This is simply in the story for us to go, whoa, it's him! But it makes no sense. In the illusion, Solaire states that Fira isn't fit to wear that armor, and during the story we learn the name of where she is from. It's Haromark. But if we take into account where Solaire is from, she might be from Astora too, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's just making shit up and throwing in member berries. Each character talks in early modern English. Dost thou find it compelling for thy characters and stories to talk it like this? Sure. Some characters from Dark Souls talk like that, but not everyone. The games aren't very dialogue heavy, as it's mostly completely optional whether or not to listen or skip, but since this is a comic, we have to bear through the entirety. Later on in the book, we learn that actually Aldrich was using Fira, controlling her memories, and it's revealed that Fira burnt her hometown and her family in hopes of trying to protect them from the undead curse. In the end, the dragon is resurrected, Aldrich is killed, and Fira is now undead. Sadly, I did not like this at all. It didn't feel like the Dark Souls of comics. It felt like something you read on webtoons. The story felt so shallow, the references felt cheap, and something about the art and coloring makes it feel so washed and glossy. It's like I'm looking at somebody trying to imitate the look of a painting, but only using Photoshop brushing tools. Shit, and I wasn't half wrong. At the end, they tell how they colored the art. Layers of airbrushing in Photoshop. It looks better than anything I could ever do, but it leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. Keep in mind that this is the first, so it's only up from here. Right? Dark Souls, Legends of the Flame. This time around, the book has a different structure, as it's not just a singular story by one writer and artist. It's 3 separate stories by 3 different writers, 4 different artists, and 1 studio, Komikaki Studios, the same fuck-ass studio who did The Breath of Andolus. The book opens in the opening place from Dark Souls 2, and we can see the main character talking with one of the old hags in red. He stares into the fire, and then we're hit with the first short story. Crossroads, written by George Mann, with art by Piotr Kowalski, and colors by Brad Simpson. Thank God we have an actual guy doing the colors. This comic is semi-related to The Breath of Andolus, Andolus, as Fira's home village of Haromark is mentioned by name as where the main character looking for set guy is from. Heroth of Haromark. He had returned to his home in the village to see everybody was burnt to death by Fira in hopes of averting the curse. I wonder why it seems so far that the comics are really set on making the Faram armor set the default look for the main characters. Seeing as how hated Dark Souls 2 is now, I think it's great still. And the armor is sick. So our hero, Heroth, is adventuring, looking for the cure for the curse of the undead, as characters usually do in the world of Dark Souls. And he comes across a criminal who is being crucified to some post. They chat it up, and the criminal, named Mortlock, reveals he knows where a man who has a cure is. So Heroth and our scarecrow-looking man venture forth. They come to the ruins, and as Heroth is inspecting a pile of bodies, the criminal takes a random sword that was just lying around and decapitates Heroth, stating that death is the only cure for this affliction. This teaches us that you shouldn't be taking medical advice from just anyone nowadays. The last panel showing the criminal luring another undead into his trap. Oh yeah, so that's the end of the story. Okay, look, I know it's an asshole move to complain about how underdeveloped Heroth or the criminal are, seeing as this is a short story, but frankly, I feel like Crossroads needed something, anything more for it to be better. Like, it's just okay as I see it now. The final panel showing that this isn't a one-off occurrence and was actually orchestrated by Mortlock is interesting and could stand on its own, as well as perhaps hearing more about Heroth for his death to have more of an impact. A single page longer could have made us more attached to Heroth, but no, his death is just one of many that we don't care for. Hearing more about Mortlock or why he chooses to do this in a land of the damned is also something I'd like to know. But anyways, the next short is The Flames Return, written by Tariq Moose with art by Damian Worm. For what it's worth, this is my favorite story so far. It's very short, but it's still my favorite. The art doesn't pull the glossy Photoshop airbrushing bullshit, and it has some nice jagged edges and shapes. The paneling is fun, leaving quite a bit of black blank space between. But how's the story though? The art does most of the storytelling here, as the monologue is from the main character, who is a non-distinct knight. He returns to his lover who has been slain. He then ventures to a castle covered in Dark Souls 3 yellow. God, that game is fucking yellow. He manages to use some sort of magic to return her to life, but he fumbles and misspeaks. Instead of, "Bring her back to life as she was," he says, "Never let her die." Thus, she reanimates as a fucking monster, and he grabs the sword, cursed to now have to murder his already dead wife. Tastefully, we don't actually see the awesome fight between a man and his dead girlfriend. This story is hardly connected to Dark Souls. It doesn't fuck up any lore when it could have. Like, she could have become an undead or a hollow immediately, I guess, but instead it tells a small focused story of tragedy. I'm a big fan. This is the Dark Souls of short stories. The next short is titled The Labyrinth, written by Dan Waters, with 2 T's, and with art by Nick Percival. This short tells the tale of the city of Quan, surrounded by a maze designed by the Jigsaw Killer himself, as it's filled with death traps meant to keep the undead out. However, the labyrinth isn't working, as somehow more and more undead are making it through the maze into the city that the king sought so hard to protect. He ordered to extend the maze to within the city walls. But still, the undead hollows keep making it through, until eventually they overtake the city, and now the labyrinth serves as a prison for the now undead citizens to be trapped inside and to die over and over, left to hollow in a prison made by their ruler who only wanted to protect them. This tale is told to a traveler by a bonfire outside of the labyrinth by an undead. He's just giving the adventurer a heads up before he goes into Sense Fortress Extreme Edition. We end the story learning that the undead was actually the king, wearing the same ring shown during the story. The same king who has now lost everything. I found this story to be kind of great. Well, as in its concept. Its execution was alright, again, seeing as it's a short. It could have been better with a few more pages. Shoot me, I know. The architect character who designed the labyrinth for the king doesn't get his comeuppance, as he's painted to be sort of the antagonist, finally building the labyrinth all into the king's throne room to hide himself, which we never see. The weakest part of this story, again, is sadly the art. The coloring makes everything look like shit. My personal favorite being the king at the end of the story. He looks fucked from a distance, but then you get closer and he looks more zombie-like. It's not the worst, but I think this angle of wanting to look realistic with hyper amounts of detailing in some panels, but just smudgy shit in others hurts the overall look. It's alright. I rated a D for Dark Souls. Back to the bitch in the old rags and the Ashen one? Wait, hold up. Ashen one? The protagonist from Dark Souls 3 with the witch bitches from Dark Souls 2? They're supposed to be in completely different and distant lands. What the fuck is going on here? Oh, the lore is all fucked up, but whatever. The Ashen One doesn't say fuck all, so the old hag keeps on telling him stories. The cat on our laps also speaks. There are talking cats in the Dark Souls universe. In one, you can find Alvina in the Darkroot Garden and join their covenant or religion or whatever. And in Dark Souls 2, there's a talking cat named Sweet Shalkor, who tells you lore about defeated bosses. The cat in the comic doesn't look much like either of them. But anyways, on we go. Back in the things betwixt, the Red Witch Lady eggs on our traveler to go venture forth, but since our Ashen One isn't ready, the old hag gives forth another lesson. The Devoted, written by Dan Waters and with art by Casper Wingard. The art! Good God, this story has some nice comic looking art. We follow an adventurer who looks like a cross between Megatron and the Shredder. He enters a dark cave or a dungeon or whatever and is greeted by one of the many treasures of Dark Souls. A sexy woman with the lower half of an arachnid. The narration would have you believe that the fighter is the one speaking, talking of a beautiful creature in a world full of monsters, which makes the reader double take and think, wait, what the fuck? That's because our fighter isn't the one narrating. It's one of the petrified men in the boss arena. She has the ability to turn things into stone with her laser or whatever it is. And in the end, the petrified man can do nothing but watch as his beloved deity falls before the mighty warrior who put up a good fight. The final panels, I think, are peak.
Now I stand here, helpless, as this callous monster ravages her beauty. His bloodlust finally quenched.
The bait and switch perspective shift is fun, and within the story, the character actually uses a Dark Souls mechanic, or Bloodborne mechanic. He dodges, not a roll, to avoid an attack. Just like the Flames Return, this short is, short and sweet. It could work in or out of the Dark Souls universe. I could almost imagine it better as a poem. You believe you're following a brave warrior who is then described as a monstrosity by a follower of the actual monster. Like George Lucas said,
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
The premise and execution are excellent, and I'm happy to say this one is good. Next up to pitch is That Which Holds Us Human, written by Cassandra Kaw, with art by Danielle Serra. Straight off the bat, the first thing that should grab the reader's attention is the art. It's great. It's watercolored, and it works much better than the Photoshop airbrushing. This short is simple too. It shows what seems to be another adventurer in the Faram set entering a village, only to be swarmed by those egg fuckers. They kill him and take his humanity to the Firekeeper from Dark Souls 3. They're keeping the flame alit, waiting for her, whoever she is a mystery, I guess. Perhaps it's the fair lady from Dark Souls 1, or any of the other half-naked, half-bug ladies from Dark Souls. Nonetheless, we see another adventurer, so we can understand this simple story is that of creatures hanging on to what little hope they have, murdering who they must to keep the flame alit, just as a lot of other characters in Dark Souls do. It's short, feels like a short glimpse into a world where tons of beings are aiming to do the same thing as one another. Wait until the end, or wait until someone comes to save them. Beautiful artwork. I'm a sucker for watercolors, and I believe that it carries this short. Having the story be around those annoying fucking egghead simps is a choice as well, shining a light on how even the lowliest of life is still desperate but clinging on to hope in some shape or form. I rated a Dark Souls 2 out of a Dark Souls 3, take that how you will. On to the last short, Action Replay, written again by our dear friend George Mann with art by Nick Percival. Look, it's perhaps Stockholm Syndrome is creeping in, but in this instance, I like the art for the most part. This image in particular is pretty cool. The short tells a story of a man, an undead who is forced by what looks like elves to continue fighting to the death over and over again in some sort of gladiator arena. The first time it was told in Crossroads about how everything is doomed and how people die over and over again and the cyclical nature of death and lack of hope in the world of Dark Souls was cool, but now after what feels like the umpteenth time, I think I've had my fair share. The most interesting aspect in this short to me is the race of monsters keeping the protagonist in prison. They look like elves, but to my knowledge there isn't any kind of elven race in the universe. I mean, look at this monster he fights. What the fuck else can you describe this as other than an elf? I rate this an E for elf on the shelf. To close the book off, We have something strange, since my copy ends off after action replay. However, on the fandom wiki it says that the book ends on the shrine, with the witch feeling disappointed as the adventurer leaves, probably annoyed or bored by the several stories. The variant covers at the end are cool, and I think this one with the mimic is my favorite. Legends of the Flames certainly was full of legends, but I'm not so sure about flames. Less than half are good in my opinion, but fair effort. Going forward, let's hope it's only up from here. Dark Souls, Tales of Embers. Wow, okay, so no, it wasn't up from anywhere. So to my disappointment, of the 6 Dark Souls comics, this 2-issue limited series is a continuation of Legends of the Flame. It came out later, but I thought we should go through it first, if it could make any more sense. Man, I hate this, and the feeling that I got when I saw this was devastating. So back to the shrine, we pick up where the wiki left us at. The adventurer went through the fog gate, which I didn't think it was a fog gate in the previous issues, as the fog isn't so foggy, but it is indeed a fog gate. He doesn't seem to pick up where the last issue ended, however, I guess it's because time in Dark Souls is all wonky. Souls of adventurers from long ago and in the future all intertwined together. So our man returns to the shrine, this time not greeted by the witch in red, but instead by the cat. He says the fire is dying, but the embers still have stories to tell. The traveler takes a rest by the embers, and I'm just thinking, hey buddy, there's no bonfire here. Fucking get up, it's not safe, dumbass. The first story is The Savior, written by George Mann. Man, am I getting tired of seeing his name. With art by Danielle Serra. Stunning watercolor art again, glad to see, but I'm afraid it can't help save this story. It's about this guy named Master Sarek who's telling a story to these children when an adventurer comes to free them, by then killing them and taking their humanity, leaving them dead or hollowed. As the end says, the age of the Dark Wraith is coming. The Dark Wraith being a covenant you can join in the games which focuses around invading other players and doing PvP. Getting invaded sometimes is some of the most annoying shit ever to happen. Like, damn, I just ran through this gauntlet and then another player or an NPC is in my fucking face and trying to get me. I like this, I like the short, but it just doesn't feel fucking Dark Souls to me. Next, The Infected, written by Michael Walsh, with art by the same Michael Walsh and Dylan Burnett. This one is particularly interesting, as it has a title page like the others, but the first panel also has a title, with the credits too. Before I even say anything, I just want to let it be known that this one is good. It tells the short tale of 2 brothers fighting alongside each other when one gets infected and turns into one of these weird creatures from Dark Souls 3 that I'm always scared to fight. Apparently they're called Pus of Man? Okay. Anyways, the remaining brother uses a pyromancy spell to light his sword on fire and slay his brother. Short and sweet, interesting use of an actual in-game item or spell, and building off slightly from a concept from the game, the Pussy Men monster. It ends with a question mark as we see a little bit of the black goo, like venom, is on the surviving brother. But like, we're never gonna see this character again. Love it, I rate it Sekiro Game of the Year edition. Next is Witches, written by Tariq Musa with art by Damien Worm. 3 witch bitches in a cave bicker and the main one then sacrifices the other 2 to preserve a flame. That's about as simple as I can summarize it. And that's the end. Now back at the shrine, the adventurer is reenacting his favorite scene from Evil Dead by getting picked up by vines. And what the fuck did I say before about there not being a bonfire? And I'm just thinking, hey buddy, there's no bonfire here. Fucking get up. It's not safe, dumbass. The flat black cat sat and spat at the man who was stuck in a can. So our guy, he's in a bad situation. The cat is talking about how souls are eternal until the adventurer breaks free and crushes the cat to death with rubble, ending the shrine plotline that held the books together. Yet, the shorts go on. Back to our man, George Mann, with art by Peter Kowalski and Brad Simpson. Behold, townsfolk, and behold viewers, a setting in Dark Souls that isn't desolate and filled with death. It's a town that's full of people who are actually alive. So this traveling mime or jester or showman or whatever they're called shows up and tells the story of a fair lady, a ruler who wanted to be young again. So she hunted down a man who was said to be eternally young. What was his secret? Sucking dick. He then sucked the queen dry and the people in the town who are watching him, leaving them hollow. Reminds me of using humanity in Dark Souls 1, going from a disgusting dried raisin to a fuckable walking breadstick. Again, the theme of losing humanity is all that connects this story to Dark Souls. Moving on, Shattered Mirror by Dan Waters with art by Casper Wingard. The art is nice and comic booky if that makes sense. The colors, line work, and inking are alright. I do think they could have used some darker blacks, however. So this short follows a mirror knight, a knight holding a giant mirror shield, kind of like the Looking Glass Knight from Dark Souls 2. So he's in what appears to be some sort of arena, and is just constantly getting invaded. He contemplates his existence and what it would mean if he were to stop fighting, but settles on that all he is these fights. Shit, I wasn't expecting Dark Souls short story to go into existentialism. What the fuck? Once he's slain an invader, out comes another. Rinse and repeat. One of them does perform a dodge roll, so just for that, I rate it 100 out of Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. Pound of Flesh, written by Cassandra Kaw, art by Andrea Olimpieri and Motaya Iacono. This one was a bit hard to comprehend what was happening, but it felt good, if that makes any sense. So on first impressions, we got our man in the Faram set, coming in to face off against the boss, two sisters who seem to have fused into one being, one sister being held up and the other being neglected. Quote,
I was your shadow, your toy, your sin eater, your sacrificial lamb. Do you remember the things you asked of me? The teeth from my mouth worn around your pretty neck. The free...
Wait, that can't be right.
더 드레스 플랜스트 from my 바렐백.
Jesus Christ. Favoritism in this family is absolutely wicked. Sad tale, but then the undead curse came along, and their mother decided to give up the unwanted daughter to save the one she liked. But the unwanted one had other plans, instead wanting revenge. She somehow messed with the process, and it ended with them being conjoined, together forever. Doomed to die repeatedly by adventurers through the lands, as Dark Souls is all about cycles, death, reincarnation, blah 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 blah. This ending for the unwanted sister is happy. Despite dying each time, she now shares that pain with her sister, whom she hates. And quote, but as long as I can share the pale light leave your eyes, I wouldn't want it any other way. Chef's a kiss. I like that. Now, this is something I can get behind and say is good. There's a full story here in this short. It's filling. Despite the beginning being confusing because of the art and paneling, the pieces fall into place eventually, and with a second read through, it becomes more clear. This one is the Dark Souls of Tales of Ember. Oh, and the guy does a dodge roll too. At the end of the book, it said that Dark Souls will return. Like this is a fucking Marvel post-credits scene. This feels stupid. So that's the end of the book. Moving on to the next one, number 5. Dark Souls, Winter's Spite. Jesus Christ, man. George, man. Why does he keep returning? Was there nobody else willing to write a Dark Souls comic? And back again after Breath of Andolus, Alan Qua is back to do the art too. This comic ran for a total of 4 issues, starting in November 2016 and ending in April of 2017, the same month when the previously discussed Tales of Embers started. The book tells the story of another adventurer, wearing the fucking Faram set. Wait. This isn't the Faram set, but it damn sure looks like it. This time our main character, Andred of Ithvale, is on a quest to find a weapon that was stolen from him, the Pyre Blade. The stakes are high, I guess. I mean, he isn't undead, so he has more to lose. His quest has led him to a cold, snowy place, Winter's Spite. Here he's held captive and forced to participate in gladiator fights like a few other Dark Souls comics. It's crazy that despite there being so few comics, they reuse the same ideas again and again. Through his battles, we get some cameos, a Bell Gargoyle, a Titanite Demon, and the Silver Knight. Wow, I recognize what those are, wow. Our boy Andy is a bad motherfucker, however, so he escapes and the rest of the story happens. Andred has visions of a bad bitch sometimes. She guides him occasionally, but this time she's guided him into getting captured by the Duke of Ambervale, another location not from the games. Ambervale seems to be a riff on the Painted Worlds from Dark Souls 1 and 3, snowy realms trapped within paintings. This world was crafted by a queen, and it's within a snow globe. where her undead husband now reigns over. The Duke who captured Andy is going to try and exchange him for a cure to the undead curse, but we know that's not possible. The art still irks me a little, but this time around it's a little less. And there's this double page spread which I think is fantastic. Dark Souls lore is broken in this book as Andy jumps out of a window and falls more than 4 feet and survives. But forget that, because Andy also fights a mimic, but he didn't even try to open it, so the lore is fucked up again. The climax of the story is Andy meeting up with the bad bitch. The Duke and his sidekicks are magicked away by Emma Frost, and the guy with Andy's sword shows up to slay the Frosty Lady and free the people stuck in this snowy hell. Andy doesn't give a fuck. And we learn that he's actually a bad guy who killed his uncle and female member of his family, presumably his mom. So he kills the actual hero of the story, then bargains his exit from the world. It ends with the white-haired baddie saying how he'll eventually return, and she's probably not wrong. I always have to return to areas later as I need to watch walkthroughs and learn where items and illusionary walls are to find missing items. Also, if it annoyed you that I didn't mention the lady's name and only referred to her as Bad Bitch or Emma Frost, her name is Lady Parnethia. Yeah, I just didn't want to pronounce that a couple of times. Again, I feel the story leaves a lot to be desired. The main character is nothing, the world building is okay, and the art is lacking again due to the colors. Nothing in the plot or about the main character felt engaging. Plus the ending revelation that Andy Andred is dreadful doesn't hit the reader since we're not attached to him in any way. I'm sorry, but I don't think this book is any good. It's so bad that the Dark Souls fandom wiki on it is empty, and I think that speaks volumes. I give Dark Souls Winter's Spite a rating of spit. Dark Souls, The Age of Fire. Written by Ryan O'Sullivan with art by Anton Kokarev. I'm so glad George's name isn't on this at all. No hate to him, but come on, man, there's so many stories so far. We need somebody else, please. I find it interesting that at the beginning of this book, it has this disclaimer. The story and worldview depicted here are created uniquely for this comic. Some may differ from those in the original video game. Stating that this world is uniquely crafted for the comic and may be different from the games, which is nice to add in, but then we're greeted by actual named characters from the games, something that's been missing from the other comics, I feel. Going forward, I'll keep in mind that this isn't a one-to-one adaptation and is going to take some liberties to tell an original story. Okay, I am okay with this. Off rip, we're doing the opening cutscene of Dark Souls 1. Gwyn throwing his lightning and the war with the ancient dragons. This time, a red dragon rips him away as his silver knights just kinda watch like fucking morons. Ooh, what do we do? Nothing, because they're burnt to a crisp. Only one knight named Archon survived, because Artorias shows up and kills the attacking dragon. He's the best fight in Dark Souls 1, in my opinion. Fucking eat shit. Gwyn then descends down from the sky like he's fucking Shazam covered in lightning. He could do this? His powers also include being able to fix a sword with only his hands. What the fuck? So our boy the Silver Knight gets promoted because Gwyn thinks Archon's the one who killed the dragon. Others call him Dragon Slayer later on and he's just kinda going with it. Artorias doesn't say shit. This comic is more so what I expected of a Dark Souls comic to be like. We're going through areas in Lordran, the location from Dark Souls 1, with new characters interacting with legacy characters, fleshing out the world more, adding on to established lore. The art style this time around is what we've come to expect, but I noticed something different. It wasn't bothering me as much, and I realized why. Seeing characters who are mostly just wearing helmets in this art style is fine, but bare facial features look wrong. So, the story has the knights traveling around Lordran, visiting lovely locations like New Londo and Izalith, only to die and leave our main man burnt, turning him from a silver knight into a black knight. More accurate. Oh, and we get to see Seed the Scaleless, and he looks fucking cool. The rest of the story is mostly just setting up for the first Dark Souls game. We see Oscar of Astora, the knight who frees you at the beginning of the first game, starting your adventure. He's in the Undead Asylum and fighting the Black Knight that is there in the asylum. And as it turns out, that knight is Archon. Overall, this is what I expected from a Dark Souls comic, building onto the lore and expanding out characters from the game. Like now I know that the Black Knight in the Undead Asylum has a name. Was this book amazing? No, not really, but I do think it's just fine. The weakest part of this book is the story, in my opinion. There's lots of conversations between characters only from the book, which is fine. But like the games, a lot of the story happens off of the page and we don't see it. That works in the game since you are very late to the story. The war is over and the world is already fizzling out, and you're just there. But for a comic, using it not as a setting but a way to move the story forward doesn't really work. I think this book was fine, not incredible. There's only one rating that would make sense for this story. I give Dark Souls The Age of Fire the rating of, chicken. It's alright, not amazing, a bit bland. Surprise! The wiki I checked hasn't been updated and there's actually another Dark Souls comic. There's not even a page on it on the wiki. I guess either interest was generally lost over time or people were just burnt out by the books so they didn't return, or the Dark Souls fandom is dying. If I wasn't making this video, I wouldn't have read this. Number 7, The Willow King, or Dark Souls, The Willow King. What a surprise! Guess who wrote this book? Our man, George man, again. What the fuck is going on? He's the only one who wants Dark Souls comics, I think. He's the supply and demand, a self-sustaining cycle. The art is by Man House, which I thought was some sort of studio, but I think it's actually a person. And it is. I got in contact with him and asked him some questions. So what's in store for us this time? Well, taking place in the kingdom of Uthril, which isn't from or mentioned in any of the games like the other kingdoms that have been in the other comics, and that's fine. The comic starts off pretty well. It's the usual as far as Dark Souls goes. There's a kingdom, the flame starts to go out, and they need someone to link it. In comes hometown hero, Harad the Brave, who did accomplish the task, until he combusted into ashes. I lied, he failed. The king himself then went and adventured and relinked it himself. The kingdom survived, but Dark Souls is about cycles. Flames can't stay alive forever. So when it was finally time for it to be lit again, a Lord of Cinder, or a previous person who linked the flame but who is now dead but brought back to life to relink it again, like from Dark Souls 3, was called upon. The king, Lord Uthril. But again, like the Lords of Cinder from Dark Souls 3, they ran away. Now under the moniker the Willow King, he sits and rules over a kingdom of darkness in the dead body of a giant. And not the usual empty whole-faced giants we see in Dark Souls, but a fucking giant. Oh, and guess who else is a Lord of Cinder? Not Harad the Brave, but he arises from the dead. Now he's Harad, the Unlived, and he's back. Not to link the flame, but instead to make the Willow King fulfill his duty of lighting the flame. Him and a group of 3 ragtag adventurers with tragic backstories team up to dethrone the king. Gurn of the Forest, he has a big sword. Elis of the Cascade, she's fighting for her mother, Morgwith, and she has 2 daggers. And last but not least, Bowl of the Dream. He wears Black Knight's armor and his backstory is the most interesting to me. He chained his wife to a tree and left her to die for reasons. He dies in issue 2 and sees a vision of his love waiting for him. I think he should just jump off a cliff if that's what's waiting for him on the other side. During their travels, they come across people who celebrate and worship the coming darkness and death, which, hold on a second, that's interesting. Yes, in Dark Souls, there's always a lack of hope. In a world which all seems lost and everybody and everything is just waiting for the world to end, there are those who choose to worship death, but this is different. The people are worshiping the fading itself, not trying to rush or slow its coming, just acknowledging and praising the process. This is a new angle, and it's pretty welcome. High five, George. You did it, man. You did it. Matter of fact, get Mr. Man to write a Suicide Squad book, because all the characters die, and the Willow King is slain. Oh shit, wait, but if he's dead, how are we gonna relink the flame? He's not, but Charad will. Chad Harad, Charad. Did that work? He links the flame in the end and explodes into ash as he did before. However, this time something interesting happens. The flame lights, but it ignites the heart of the giant's body. Not keeping with Dark Souls tradition, this behemoth isn't hostile. Instead, it roams the lands, providing the flame and hope to any and all who see it. An interesting note to end on. Seeing as how all Dark Souls games leave you with options for different endings, usually a light one and a dark one, this seems to be a light one. Let's use Dark Souls 1 as an example. Once defeating the final boss, Gwyn, you are left with the choice to either take up his place and relight the flame, or let the flame die out and allowing the world to succumb to darkness. Reigniting the flame keeps the world alive, but at what cost? Humanity is in shambles. Those who are left are hollowing away into insanity. Death and suffering is more common than a michwe. The largest fast food franchise in the world. They sell ice cream and lemonade, and frankly, their ice cream's pretty alright. Dairy Queen's better though, in my opinion. Why prolong this? Is this truly better than the dark ending? We don't know what will happen in the dark. Everyone will die, surely, but who's to say what will rise out of the darkness? I think just the fact that this book left me pondering this, it really has me thinking this wasn't of the same quality as the others. I walked away from this loving the art, not being annoyed or angered by the concepts, characters, or plot, and generally just decently satisfied. In the end, I'm glad it wasn't a who's who of named characters. We didn't need Solaire popping in for no reason.
Ah, hello. I am Solaire of Astora, an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight.
And its disconnectedness worked heavily in its favor here. I got to talk to the artist, Man House, a little bit about his work. He mentioned how his first job was on a TV show that told urban legends from around the world, his history of having done horror books before, and that his biggest influence on his style is Mike Mignola, the goat behind Hellboy, and drawing men with narrow shoulders. This wasn't a formal interview, I just wanted to ask a couple of things, especially if he's a fan of the games, which he said he is. He's beaten the first one, but not the others, yet surprisingly he said 3 is his favorite, due to the boss design and aesthetics. It was cool to ask him about this stuff, and I'm really glad he was nice, and he's an incredible artist. I mean, look at his stuff.
And I owe another apology.
George, man, perhaps I judged you too harshly before. You definitely made up for the previous Dark Souls books with this. And lastly, before moving on, I wanted to rate this story 3.5 Miyazaki's. On the Bandai Namco scale, that is real and they didn't make up. And that's a pretty good score, and I would recommend you read this, if you're gonna read any of these books. Now. Time to leave the Western world and head to the East. Starting in late 2024, Shonen started publishing Dark Souls Redemption, written by Julian Blondell. Wait, that doesn't sound like a Japanese name. He doesn't look Japanese either. Fuck it, I shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Also, the art is by Shonen. Now, I'm not much into manga, and I know what Shonen Jump is, but is the artist a guy just named Shonen? It could just be a pen name, I guess, whatever. I was assuming the manga would stay closer to the source material, but it takes the same approach as the other comics. Set in another kingdom, far away, there's a group led by a shithead, Galor, the leader of the Keepers of the Scale. Their faction hunts down flames and the souls of adventurers. We follow the character of, it's either pronounced Ira or Ira, but since it was written by a white guy, I'm just gonna say Ira. So she wakes up in a crypt with amnesia. She ventures out of the crypt and comes across a couple characters. A dog who goes, ooh, a giant titan of dead bodies, and her future companion, Yudo. The mystery of who she was before the memory loss is slowly revealed over the later chapters. We learned Yudo actually knew her. She was a mother, was as in the kid's dead. Ira is killed, but not really. She's apparently immortal, even though she was killed, and the concepts of hollows aren't really featured much earlier in the story. Yudo dies too, but isn't revived immediately like Ira.
End of Volume 1.
The second volume features a new character who I think is more true to the spirit of the games. How so? He's not wearing any clothes. Lower equipment load, faster rolls, Elon Musk wouldn't know shit about this. And it might just be a nod to Let Me Solo Her, seeing as he was naked with a jar on his head, and this character is mostly naked, with a helmet. Our naked man's name is Minstrel Jonas, and his soul is trapped in his helmet, the only thing he wears. Well, I mean aside from his underwear, which is game accurate. You can't see their dick and balls. Apparently, he is the helmet and just possesses the bodies of hollows. So our boy, Jonas, meets and helps Ira resurrect Yudo by making a bonfire. It's said that a soul needs a bonfire to be resurrected, which sounds right. So they make one. Yudo is brought back to life and then takes a drop of humanity to regain his memories. Not sure about that, and wasn't aware it came in liquid form. Jonas himself is a hollow possessed by the helmet, so I don't know, maybe throw some humanity his way. The rest of the chapters currently explores more of Ira's backstory and how Yudo and Jonas fit in and pursue their own adventures alongside her. I'd say the strongest part of this manga is the art. The heavily detailed spreads are mind-blowing and some of the creatures are so intricately drawn. The story, on the other hand, is something else, and by something else, I mean it's along the lines of the Western comics. Aside from some of the game's key iconography like bonfires, illusory walls, and even player messages, Yes, this is the second time we're seeing them. Fucking player messages. This time they're left by a dead kid. Without this stuff, this is just like any other fantasy story with knights and dragons. The desire of the bad guy for flame and souls could very well be replaced by money or any other form of good. Volume 3 isn't out yet, but I'm probably not going to follow up on it, and this might sound like a shitty complaint, but I wish the story was written by a Japanese person.
Why you boring me? I'm ready.
I rated D out of Dark Souls. A through line between all the books we've looked at is how most of them do the same thing, which inherently isn't bad, but I found their content wasn't good enough to justify their existence. Not even as just side content that exists in the same world. Perhaps I'm being a real Debbie Downer, but frankly I don't think I am. The lows aren't super low and the highs aren't above the sky. The majority just falls into the range of acceptable. It's okay, not amazing. It tells a coherent story. Very few were thought-provoking or stimulating, but the ones that were felt like a little treat, a chocolate chip in a salad of rotten potatoes, I guess. Why couldn't any of the stories have been centered around a beloved character, showing adventures they've been on? Wouldn't you like to know more about Patches? What he's been through? How about the Onion Knight? I imagine it could have turned out either terribly cringeworthy,
God damn, man. You fat motherfucker.
or like fan fiction. Or it could have turned out as a nice side story, a little treat for the fans who read comics. I get that making a narrative that needs to have dialogue and interesting characters from the world of Dark Souls is difficult, since the protagonist characters are all fucking mute, and it's risky to flesh out fan favorite characters without angering some dipshit. But I think an attempt would have been worth it. Hire someone to help the writer, someone who knows the lore ass to tits and who can assist when need be. Or just ignore the lore while using the characters, and make a crazy fucking story. I've made it clear in other videos, but again, I'm not a fan of expanded material. Comic spin-offs can be good. Despite me hating the games, Injustice is a prime example. The comics arguably are better and more iconic than the games now. I think it just shows it can be done. But I want to ask, is Dark Souls, the series notorious for obtuse and cryptic storytelling, needing of a comic spin-off? What was the reason these were made? Well, the first comic sold out day one, so I guess the answer is that companies like money and are the poopy guy from Elden Ring who loves defiling corpses. Read the comics, leave a comment, tell me I'm wrong, and thanks for staying until the end. And as a wise man once said, it's not about the journey, it's about the destination. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Keep an eye out for a video about the Dark Souls games made by this guy named Hydra. He's a really cool dude, and I'm looking forward to when he drops it. Join the Discord if you'd like. If you really like the video, perhaps you could consider supporting me on Patreon. Helps me get a little bit closer to making this my full-time job. And thanks for watching.